life shifted forever. And it wasn't last week when her father passed away, or 5 years ago when she became a single mom. It was the moment she heard a man behind her whisper something filthy and felt the stranger next to her shift slightly in his seat. Like a fuse quietly sparking, it happened 32 minutes after takeoff. She was in seat 14C on a packed evening flight from Seattle to Chicago, heading home from a funeral with a suitcase stuffed with folded sorrow and a son sleeping peacefully against her arm. The man beside her hadn't said much since boarding. He wore a charcoal hoodie, eyes forward, posture calm but alert, still, yet in a way that felt more like readiness than indifference. Lena hadn't thought much of him. She wasn't in the mood for small talk anyway. She was used to managing alone. Then the voice came. 2 rows back, low and slick with entitlement. "Bet you'd be warmer without that sweater." The man drawled behind her. "Why don't you take it off, honey?" Lena froze. The words, murmured so softly, dripped down her spine like icy oil. A rush of panic flared beneath her ribs, tightening her throat. She glanced at Noah's soft curls against her sleeve, and a spike of helpless anger pushed against the fear. She couldn't let this happen, not with her son right there, trusting the world in sleep. She didn't turn. She didn't answer. He murmured something else, closer this time. She felt it, a hand brushing the back of her seat, fingers creeping where they shouldn't. She sat up straighter. Her pulse thundered behind her eyes, but she forced her voice to stay level. "Please don't touch me," she said firmly, though her voice stayed even. A mocking laugh. Then the man beside her moved, not with drama or aggression, but fluidly, silently, as if he'd been trained never to hesitate. Lena barely had time to process. Something about how he positioned himself, not blocking her exactly, but a step ahead, angled and braced, told her this wasn't the first time he'd done something like this. Relief tangled with a raw edge of embarrassment, but for the first time since boarding, she didn't feel entirely alone. The creep behind her lifted both hands with a smug grin. "Hey, chill out, man. Just talking." "You need to stop," the stranger said quietly. The whole row seemed to hold its breath. "I said back off." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The words landed like stone. The man behind them chuckled again. "Who the hell do you think you are?" The stranger tipped his head slightly, weighing whether to reply. Then he said, "I'm the last person you want to test at 30,000 feet. That was all it took. A flight attendant came by as murmurs spread through the cabin. Within minutes, the man behind Lena was escorted to the back of the plane, cursing under his breath. The stranger settled back into his seat, no smug grin, no hero's pose, just quiet. Lena turned to him slowly, her heart still pounding. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but weighted. He gave a single nod. "You're welcome." She studied him now. Strong jawline, eyes scanning the rows with subtle precision, hands resting steady on his knees. Something about the way he sat there. It wasn't the posture of a man trying to look tough, but of someone who'd seen enough to know when to step in and when to stay silent. "I'm Lena," she offered, breath catching a little. "Jack," he said. No last name, no follow-up questions, just steady calm. What Lena didn't realize yet was that this man hadn't just served his country. He would end up rewriting the path of her life. The cabin fell into a hush again, the kind that lingers after something ugly nearly turns worse. Lena sat frozen for a moment, her hand resting on Noah's shoulder. Her son hadn't stirred through any of it, his tiny chest rising and falling in a gentle rhythm. Lena carefully pulled his blanket higher, her fingers trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. The sudden stillness made her aware of every muscle aching with tension she'd been too scared to show. Beneath her ribs, her heartbeat still rattled like a trapped bird. Jack hadn't shifted an inch since sitting down again. He stared ahead, unbothered, but she noticed his broad shoulders were still squared, still vigilant. "Does that sort of thing happen a lot?" she asked in a low voice. He turned his head just a fraction. "Too often." There was a stillness to him that wasn't passive. It was discipline. Like someone who'd learned to stay centered while everyone else lost control. "Thank you," she repeated, and meant it even more this time. He gave the faintest nod. "You shouldn't have to say it. That shouldn't happen to anyone." Lena let out a quiet sigh and leaned back against her seat. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding herself together the whole flight. For a fleeting second, the thought slipped through her mind. Maybe tonight, just for once, she didn't have to brace alone. After a stretch of silence, she glanced at him sideways. "You don't really strike me as a guy who writes code for a living," she said. That pulled the faintest smile from him. "Oh, why's that?" She lifted a shoulder. "Just a hunch." "You didn't think twice. You moved like you'd done it before." Jack paused for a moment. "Military," he said at last. She studied him again, really seeing him now, the bearing, the watchful calm. It all fit. "Army? Air Force?" she asked. He gave a short nod. "Air Force. Retired, sort of." Lena raised an eyebrow. "Sort of?" He didn't answer right away. He glanced down at his hands, then back at her. "Still do some work. Let's leave it at that." She nodded, understanding the line he'd quietly drawn. There were truths he wouldn't offer, and she wouldn't pry. Another pause settled between them as the cabin lights dimmed, shifting to the soft amber glow of night mode. Lena folded her arms and released a long breath. "I didn't think this flight would be the scariest part of my week," she admitted. Jack turned slightly toward her. "Rough trip? My father's funeral." He nodded once. "No awkward condolences, no empty comfort." "I'm sorry," he said simply. Lena appreciated that. Plain, honest, no pity, no rehearsed sympathy, just words that made space for her grief without crowding it. "What about you?" she asked. "Why are you on this flight?" "Work, mostly." He didn't go into detail, and oddly enough, she didn't need him to. Silence settled again, comfortable this time, the kind that sits between two people who get that not everything needs to be spoken aloud. Noah stirred slightly against Lena's arm. She smoothed her son's hair back and pressed a gentle kiss to the top of his head. Jack's eyes rested on the little boy for a second. "You're only one?" Lena nodded. "Noah. 5 years old, and somehow wiser than me half the time." Jack's mouth curved in the faintest smile. "He's lucky. You're strong." She raised an eyebrow, half amused. "You figured all that out from watching me keep it together in 14C? "No," Jack said. "From how fast you stood your ground." Lena held his gaze for a heartbeat, then looked away. Not from embarrassment, but because the words landed deeper than she expected. For a second, her chest tightened with an ache she didn't have words for, the ache of someone seeing her when she'd nearly forgotten she deserved it. Outside, snow still twisted through the dark sky, soft chaos against the window. For the first time in years, she felt it. She wasn't carrying the weight of this moment alone. 2 hours later, the plane touched down on an unfamiliar runway. Snow now fell heavier, drifting sideways in the wind as the aircraft rolled toward a small, dim terminal. Lena peered out, puzzled by the missing skyline. "This isn't Chicago," she murmured. Jack didn't answer right away. He was already leaning forward, reading the restless tension in the cabin like a soldier scanning for exits. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to worsening weather over the Midwest and air traffic congestion, we've made an unscheduled landing at Denton Regional Airport in South Dakota. We'll be refueling and waiting for further clearance. Thank you for your patience." A ripple of frustration spread through the rows. Groans, sighs, the frantic tapping of phones struggling for signal. Lena closed her eyes for a moment, exhaustion catching up all at once. Weariness pressed behind her eyes, but underneath it was a fragile steadiness she hadn't felt in years. A layover in the middle of nowhere, a funeral behind her, and her son still curled quietly against her side. "Hey," his tone steadied her. "Breathe. One thing at a time." Lena opened her eyes, grounding herself in his calm. "Are you always this steady in storms?" she asked. His mouth twitched slightly. "No, I've just seen worse ones." Moments later, the plane came to a full stop. The doors hissed open and a blast of icy air swept through the cabin. Passengers were told they could wait inside the small terminal if they wanted. Lena hesitated. Noah was still sleeping deeply against her shoulder, but Jack was already on his feet, reaching for her carry-on. "I've got it," he said, not waiting for her permission. She looked up at him. She didn't tell him no. A small part of her, tight with fatigue, loosened at the simple relief of not having to decide everything herself for once. The terminal was small and quiet, carrying the stale scent of vending machine coffee and recycled air. Folding chairs lined the pale walls. A flickering soda machine buzzed in the corner. Jack led the way, carving out a spot in the warmest corner. Lena settled carefully, Noah still tucked in her lap. "He'll be out for a while," she murmured. Jack sat down next to her, scanning the room. Not the worst place I've been stuck. Lena traced his gaze. Bet it's not the best either. No, he said, letting a faint smile slip. But at least here nobody's shooting at us. She shot him a look. That a joke? He shrugged. Not really. Silence stretched between them again, but this time it wasn't awkward, just full. Lena shifted a little, curiosity stirring. You said you're still active? Consulting, Jack said, mostly off the record. I train teams, advise, handle sensitive assets. She lifted an eyebrow. You make it sound like a spy movie. His face didn't flinch. Sometimes it feels like one. Before she could respond, a woman in an airport staff jacket approached, clutching a clipboard. Sorry to bother you, she said gently. We're handing out hotel vouchers for families with kids. There's limited space, so we're prioritizing single parents. Lena blinked. That would be, yeah. That's us. The woman nodded. Great. It's shared shuttles, 2 adults per room max. So if you're traveling alone, she's with me, Jack said, cutting in before Lena could answer. The woman shot him a quick look, scribbled something on her sheet, and moved down the line. Lena turned to him, eyes wide. You didn't have to do that. I know, Jack said calmly, but I also know it's after midnight, you haven't slept, and you're not dragging a 5-year-old through more forms and lines. Lena hesitated, then nodded, her throat tight. A thank you sat on her tongue, too small for what she really felt. The soft, astonished comfort of realizing she wasn't alone in this mess tonight. Thank you. This time, it wasn't just for the room. The hotel wasn't much, just a roadside stop with beige walls and threadbare carpet. But it was warm, and it was quiet. They were given a room with 2 queen beds. Lena tucked Noah into one and stood there for a moment, unsure what to do next. Jack set her suitcase down in the corner, then stepped back and sat on the edge of the other bed. I can take the floor if that makes it easier, he offered, voice steady. Lena shook her head. It's fine. You've done enough. She sat across from him. A lamp between them cast a gentle golden glow over the small space. For the first time that night, neither of them had anywhere else to be. The soft light made his face look less guarded, and for a heartbeat she wondered what it would feel like to trust this quiet with someone else more than once in her life. Do you always step in like that? She asked softly. With strangers on planes? He thought for a second. No, he said. Only when I know what silence can cost. Lena didn't ask what that meant. She just watched him. His calm posture, the careful words, the look of someone who once made a promise too heavy to break. She didn't know the whole story, but for the first time, she wanted to. It was nearly 1 in the morning. Outside, snow drifted under a flickering streetlight just beyond the hotel window. Inside the quiet room, Lena sat cross-legged on her bed, arms wrapped around her knees, facing Jack across the space. Noah still slept soundly in the other bed, one arm draped over his stuffed tiger. Lena's voice broke the hush. You said silence can cost something. Jack didn't flinch. He didn't hurry to answer either. He just stared at the carpet for a long moment, like picking the right memory from a drawer stuffed with ones he'd rather bury. Her name was Marissa, he said finally. Lena stayed quiet. She was a local interpreter. Afghanistan. Smart. Fearless. Had more real courage than half the men I served with. He leaned back a little, his hands resting on his thighs. There was intel. A threat. We didn't move on it soon enough. I didn't speak up. I waited. Wanted confirmation. Protocol. He looked at Lena, eyes unwavering. She didn't make it. Lena felt the weight of the words settle in the air between them like dust. A deep ache tugged at her ribs because she knew that kind of regret, one that grows teeth in the dark when no one's watching. I'm sorry, she whispered. She was 23, Jack went on, voice even. Didn't flinch under fire, didn't beg. She deserved better than my hesitation. Lena wanted to reach for something, anything, to say. But she knew there was no right thing for that kind of loss. She knew that space too, the quiet pocket where guilt lives forever. Jack leaned forward again, elbows braced on his knees. So when I see someone too scared to speak up, I don't wait anymore. Lena nodded slowly. She understood. Not just the loss, but the way it rewires your compass for good. You carry it forever, Jack said quietly. Points right at what you should have done. Lena ran a hand through her hair. When Noah was born, I didn't know if I could handle it. My mom was sick. His father wasn't there. Jack waited, giving her space. Lena gave a crooked little smile. Correction. He left before Noah was born. I guess he liked the idea of being a dad more than the reality. She let out a light laugh, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I stayed in my hometown for years, looked after my mom, worked 2 jobs, never went anywhere, didn't date, just kept things together. I thought that was strength. It is, Jack said. Lena looked up at him. He held her gaze without blinking. You're still standing. That counts. Her throat tightened in a way that surprised her. No one had ever said that before. Not like it was a fact instead of pity. She turned her head a little, blinking hard. Jack rose and crossed to the small hotel mini-fridge. He pulled out 2 water bottles and handed one to her. Hydration helps, he said, lips twitching in a half smirk. She laughed, really laughed this time. Is that military wisdom? No, he replied. That's just what people say when they're too scared to hand you a tissue. She shook her head, smiling as she twisted the cap open. Her voice dropped a notch. I don't usually talk to strangers like this. I don't usually sit in a South Dakota motel room with people I met 4 hours ago, Jack shot back. So we're even. Lena glanced at the bedside clock. You should try to get some rest. He nodded. You too. He stood to flip off the lamp between the beds, but paused a moment longer than needed. I meant what I said earlier, he added, softer now. You're strong, even when you think no one notices. Then he turned, lay back on his bed, and closed his eyes. Lena lay down too, but sleep stayed just out of reach. She stared at the ceiling, listening to Noah's calm breaths and the quiet between her and this man who'd come into her life like a locked door swinging open during a storm. Her mind drifted to all the nights she'd held herself together alone, and the quiet truth that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to anymore. She didn't know what it meant, if it meant anything at all. But for the first time in forever, Lena Parker didn't feel like she was holding it all alone. And in the hush of a snowy Dakota night, that was everything. Morning came softly. Beyond the motel window, the storm had lifted. Snow clung to car roofs and tree branches like leftover memories, fragile, gentle beneath a pale gray sky. The shuttle to the airport arrived early, idling by the curb with mist curling around its tires. Lena stood at the mirror, brushing Noah's hair as he yawned and clutched his stuffed tiger. Jack waited by the door, already packed, hoodie zipped, eyes far away. It felt the same as it had when he first sat down beside her on that flight. Quiet, steady, needing no words. Jack didn't say much during the ride back to the airport, and neither did Lena, but the silence felt earned now. A space where trust had settled in without asking permission. By noon, they were back in the sky. No turbulence this time. No detours, no confrontations in row 14, just peace. Noah sat drawing superheroes in his seat. Jack scrolled through something on his phone. Lena stared out the window at a bright sweep of clouds, trying not to think too hard about what waited on the ground. Chicago always sounded big when you landed. Concrete, horns, restless crowds. Lena had spent most of her life figuring out how to survive in it. But stepping off that plane this time, something new pressed at her chest. A tiny voice inside her wished the sky could hold them up there forever, just a little longer before the noise came back. She didn't want to say goodbye at baggage claim. Lena pulled their suitcase from the carousel, while Noah held Jack's hand like he'd done it 100 times before. It made Lena pause. Jack noticed, and gently let go. He's a strong kid. Lena nodded. Gets it from his grandma. They stood there for a beat, in that odd gray space between strangers and whatever came next. Well, Lena said at last, breaking the quiet, thanks for everything. Jack looked at her. Really looked. Need a ride? She hesitated. No, we're good. My friend's picking us up. Jack nodded once. Okay. Lena offered her hand. Take care of yourself. He shook it, firm, steady. You too. Then he turned and walked off into the swirl of the arrivals hall. Lena watched him go, an unexpected tightness winding through her chest. The ache surprised her, how quickly something fragile could root itself inside her life without asking permission. Beside her, Noah tugged her sleeve. Will we see him again? Lena didn't answer. 3 days slipped by. Lena fell back into her usual rhythm, up before sunrise, packing Noah's lunch, working long hours at the urgent care downtown. Her life fell into place like a song she hadn't realized she knew by heart. But everything felt different now. Her apartment seemed emptier, the streets colder. Not because the weather had changed, but because she had. That night, after Noah fell asleep, Lena cracked open her laptop. She typed his name slowly into the search bar. Jack Callahan. Nothing came up at first, just a few news pieces that didn't match. But then she found it. A dusty press release, 6 years old. A grainy photo of him in uniform, Colonel Jack Callahan, commended for leadership during a hostage rescue mission overseas. Most of the details were redacted, black bars covering whole lines. Lena stared at the screen for a long time. He hadn't told her any of it. Not the rank, not the commendation. It was right. Lena closed the laptop, her heart thudding hard in her chest. She pressed her palm over it, as if she could steady the ache she wasn't ready to name yet. The next morning, the doorbell rang at 8 o'clock sharp. Lena wasn't expecting anyone. She opened the door slowly. Jack stood there. No uniform, no suitcase, no practiced distance in his eyes. Just him. "I had some leave saved up," Brock, he said simply. "Figured I'd use it." Lena blinked. "How did you?" He lifted his phone with a quiet shrug. "Your address was on the luggage tag. I jotted it down just in case." There was no arrogance in the way he said it, just plain honesty. A man who didn't like leaving loose ends. He reached into his jacket pocket. "Also, your son left something behind on the plane." He handed her a folded piece of paper, Noah's drawing. 3 stick figures holding hands. Lena stared at it, then back at him. She stepped aside, holding the door open. "Come in." Jack nodded once and stepped over the threshold, and just like that, something shifted again. No fireworks, no grand moment. Just quiet certainty. Sometimes life reroutes you down roads you never meant to take. And sometimes, the detour is exactly where you belong. The kettle whistled softly in the kitchen. Lena poured hot water into 2 mugs, steam curling toward the ceiling as she reached for tea bags. In the living room, Noah giggled at his own drawing, adding a big orange scribble over the stick figure labeled Jack. Jack stood nearby, hands tucked in his pockets, scanning the photos on her shelf. Lena and her mother, Lena in scrubs holding a tiny newborn, Noah's first steps frozen in a blurry frame. Everything about the apartment felt lived in and honest. Nothing curated. Just true. In that moment, she realized how much she'd wanted this space to feel like home for someone other than just herself and Noah. Lena handed him a mug. "Chamomile. It's the only thing I've got." "I've had worse," Jack said, taking it with a nod. He sat on the couch, looking slightly out of place among the soft blankets and scattered toys. But somehow he fit there too. Not because he tried, but because he didn't. Lena settled into the armchair opposite, wrapping her hands around her cup. "I still can't believe you're here." "I wasn't sure I would be," he admitted. "Then I saw that drawing." He nodded toward Noah, who was now crowning himself with bunny ears made of crayons. Lena smiled. "He doesn't let people in easily. But with you, it was like he'd known you forever." Jack dropped his eyes for a moment, almost shy at the praise. "I think kids just know," he said softly. When someone means it, Lena drew in a slow breath. The air between them felt warm and easy, a kind of peace that had been rare in her world. A fragile hope fluttered in her chest. Maybe this time peace would stay longer than before. But peace, she'd learned, didn't always stay. There was a knock at the door. Lena frowned. "I'm not expecting anyone." She crossed the living room and pulled it open. A man in a dark suit stood there. Tall, clean-cut, a badge clipped discreetly to his belt. His eyes shifted past Lena, landing squarely on Jack. "Colonel Callahan," the man said. Lena's spine stiffened. Jack rose from the couch, his entire posture shifting. Shoulders squared, voice clipped. "I told command I'm on leave." "I'm not here for command," the man replied evenly. "I'm here because of the Cairo file." Jack didn't flinch. "That file is sealed." "Not anymore." Lena looked between them, confusion prickling her skin. "What's going on?" Jack turned to her, voice lower now. "It's nothing, just a formality." The man cut in again. "You're not under investigation, Colonel, but we do need to ask you a few questions. Now." Jack exhaled slowly, then looked back at Lena. "I'm sorry." Without another word, he stepped into the hallway, pulling the door shut behind him. Lena stood frozen, her tea cooling in her hand. Behind her, Noah glanced up. "Where'd Jack go?" Lena swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "He had to take care of something, baby." Outside, Jack walked beside the agent in silence, snow crunching beneath their boots. After a minute, the man spoke. "You sure about this? Getting tangled up with civilians?" Jack didn't answer. He just kept moving. neither toward danger nor safety, just forward. Inside, the apartment felt emptier without him. Lena stood alone in the kitchen long after the door had closed, the 2 mugs of chamomile still giving off faint curls of steam. Noah had drifted back to his crayons, unconcerned, but Lena couldn't shake the look in Jack's eyes before he left. She pressed her fingertips to the rim of her mug, trying to hold on to the warmth he'd left behind, but it seeped away faster than she could stop it. It hadn't been fear. It had been resignation, like he'd walked this road before, stepping away from something good before it got too close. She sat down, pulling her phone closer, scrolling through the text thread she'd never dared to start. His number was there, saved but silent since the day they'd said goodbye at baggage claim. He hadn't left a note. No explanation. Just that look. "I'm sorry." Lena wanted to believe it was just work, unfinished business pulling him back. But the man at her door, the way he'd said Cairo file, it didn't feel routine. It felt like a secret she wasn't supposed to hold. That night, after Noah drifted off to sleep, Lena found herself back at her laptop. She hesitated, just for a heartbeat, then typed, "Jack Callahan, Cairo file." At first, the search turned up vague hits. Then she spotted it, an old article, stripped of details, buried deep in the archives of a military watchdog blog. Sealed linked operation in Cairo sparks quiet controversy. Civilian casualty rumors surface. No names, no confirmation. But one line snagged her breath. Sources suggest a decorated U.S. officer briefly suspended operations after the mission, citing personal responsibility for a decision that cost the wrong life. Lena leaned back in her chair, heartbeat thudding. Her fingers hovered uselessly over the keyboard, cold and trembling. The words blurred for a moment because she could suddenly see his face when he'd talked about Marissa. How he'd looked away like it hurt too much to hold her gaze. She thought of how Jack had spoken about Marissa, about waiting too long, about silence costing more than action ever could. He'd been talking about Cairo. He'd been talking about her. The next day passed in silence. By nightfall, Lena tried calling, straight to voicemail. She drafted a text, deleted it halfway through. It felt too small, too shallow for everything stuck in her chest. So instead, she stood in the hallway outside Noah's door, watching him sleep under the same drawing taped to the wall. 3 stick figures, one taller than the others, arms wide open. She wondered what Jack would say if he knew they hadn't taken it down. She wondered if he'd ever come back. But he didn't. Not the next day. Not the day after that. A week slid by. Then, on a quiet Thursday morning, just after dawn, Lena stepped outside to take out the trash, and there he was, standing at the bottom of the stairs. Same hoodie, same steady stillness. Except this time he looked tired, not in his body but in his bones, like a man who'd finally stopped outrunning himself. She froze. He didn't move. "I shouldn't have left like that," Jack said, voice rough around the edges. "I thought I was protecting you, keeping my past out of your life." Lena didn't say anything. Not yet. He stepped closer. "But what I didn't see is that maybe you weren't the one who needed protecting." A long hush settled between them, soft but heavy. Finally, Lena found her voice. "What happened in Cairo?" Jack's eyes dropped to the concrete. "When I gave the order to move, a child was in the building. We didn't see her until it was too late." Lena's breath hitched. Jack looked up again. "That's the thing about command. You live with decisions no one else remembers, but you don't forget. Not ever." She stepped aside, holding the door open. "Come in." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "You're not the only one living with ghosts." Jack stepped over the threshold, and in that moment, something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not perfect understanding, but permission. The door clicked shut behind him. Inside, Jack stood near the entryway, hands loose at his sides, like he wasn't sure whether to sit or stand at attention. Lena crossed the living room slowly, eyes steady on him. He wasn't the same man who'd sat next to her on that plane. He wasn't even the same man from the hallway a minute ago, who'd helped her carry her son through a snowstorm in South Dakota. He stood there now, stripped down in a way Lena hadn't seen before. Honest. Bare. "You didn't have to come back," she said. "I know," Jack replied. But not coming back felt worse. She didn't answer, just watched as he stepped forward and set something on the kitchen table. His wallet. He opened it carefully and slid out a slim, dark green military ID. The letters were crisp, the title beneath his name clear. Colonel, United States Air Force. Figured it was time you saw it, he said. Lena looked down at the card, then back at him. Why didn't you tell me before? Jack didn't flinch. Because I didn't want to be that guy on the plane. The uniform, the baggage. I didn't want that to be what you saw first. I wanted to be someone you didn't look at and flinch. Lena took a slow breath. I never flinched, Jack. I just didn't know. He nodded once. A hush settled over them, soft but solid. Then Noah came padding into the room, still in his pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He blinked at Jack, then broke into a grin. You came back. Jack smiled and knelt down. I said I would. Lena watched Noah wrap his arms around Jack's neck. It was so natural it pinched something deep inside her. When Jack stood again, Lena gestured toward the kitchen. Come on, I'll make coffee. They sat at the table while the pot bubbled and hissed, filling the room with warmth and something else, something neither of them dared name out loud. So, what happens now? Lena asked. Jack looked at her, steady. That depends on you. She tilted her head, guarded but open. What do you mean? I've spent most of my life deploying, to wars, to missions, to people who needed me to fix something. But this, he nodded toward her apartment, to Noah's drawing still pinned on the fridge. This isn't a mission. And I don't want to be here just because I pulled you out of a bad moment on a plane. Lena swallowed. He went on. I want to be here because I'm choosing it. Not because it's my job, but because this is the first thing in a long time that feels real. A silence pooled between them, gentle, dense with something unsaid. Then Lena leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, her voice a whisper, but strong. Do you know what the scariest part of doing this alone has been? Jack shook his head. Knowing that if something went wrong, no one would know but me. That if I broke at 2 a.m., nobody would see it. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't look away. I don't need a hero, Jack. I just need someone who shows up. He held her gaze. Then I'm already halfway there. Lena let out a slow breath, the knot in her shoulders finally loosening like a thread pulled free. She reached across the table, not a declaration, not a vow. Just her hand, palm up. Jack laid his over it. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was enough. That afternoon, they took Noah to the park. He squealed through piles of golden leaves, while Jack stood next to Lena on the bench, a quiet smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Lena glanced sideways at him. You know he's drawing you into everything now, Lena teased. I noticed, Jack said dryly. Apparently I'm a superhero and a dinosaur in the same picture. Lena laughed. And for once, when she looked at him, it wasn't like seeing a man weighed down by uniforms, past mistakes, or classified reports. It was just him, someone who had finally stepped fully into a life, not just a place. Fall slowly surrendered to early winter. The city dimmed a little sooner each day. Lena's block settled into a quiet stillness, broken only by the crunch of dry leaves under hurried boots and the laughter of kids bundled in scarves and mittens. Inside Lena's apartment, things found their own rhythm, unpolished, unplanned, but real. Jack came by most evenings after training sessions on base. Noah always sprinted to the door first, demanding cookies or stories. Sometimes Jack brought both. Other nights, he showed up with nothing but that look in his eyes that said, "It's been a day, but I wanted to be here anyway." Lena started leaving the porch light on before he even texted. She never said why. He never asked. But he always noticed. One Friday afternoon, Lena's clinic hosted a community event. Flu shots, free checkups, warm meals for anyone who needed it. She didn't expect Jack to come. Crowds weren't his thing. Too many eyes, too many exits to mind. But as she handed out forms at the front desk, she looked up and there he was, standing in the doorway in civilian clothes, quiet and steady. Noah was with him, clutching his hand and waving with the other. Lena's heart stuttered in her chest. Later that night, after Noah had drifted off to sleep, they sat together on Lena's fire escape, blankets draped over their shoulders. Steam curled from their mugs into the chill. The city blinked and whispered below them. Today meant something to you, Jack said. Lena nodded. It always does. He watched her for a long moment, then turned his eyes to the skyline. You make it look easy. She smiled. It's not. I know, he said. That's why it's beautiful. A quiet settled over them until Jack shifted and reached into his coat pocket. No speech, no build-up, just a plain envelope. He handed it to her. Lena took it, puzzled, and unfolded the paper inside. A letter, formal, stamped, unmistakable, discharge papers. Honorable, immediate. She looked up at him, breath caught. "What is this?" "I'm done," Jack said. "With deployments, with disappearing, with living a life where everything is temporary except regret." Lena's eyes brimmed, but she stayed silent. "I've served long enough to know what really matters. And for the first time I want to serve something I choose." He held her gaze, voice low but sure. "I choose this." The tears spilled before she could stop them, but her smile came with them. She whispered, "I never asked you to give it all up." "I know," Jack said softly, "but I want to." Because for once, he reached for her hand, steady and warm. "I'm not answering a call sign." He squeezed her palm. "I'm answering you." 1 year later, Lena stood at the front of a small school auditorium. Noah was graduating from his kindergarten class, grinning wide, clutching a hand-drawn certificate, waving at his mom from the stage. Jack stood in the back, quiet as always, but not hidden anymore. Teachers nodded at him, parents smiled. When the ceremony ended, Noah made a beeline straight for Jack's arms. Lena watched as Jack knelt down, lifted Noah high, and spun him once. No uniform, no titles, just him. Everything that mattered was already right there in his arms. She walked over, and Noah reached out for her too, his other hand still tangled in Jack's sleeve. The three of them stood beneath a string of paper stars taped to the auditorium wall, and in that small, ordinary moment, Lena understood something she hadn't grasped back on that flight a year ago. Sometimes the hero in your story isn't the one who arrives with grand gestures or glory. It's the one who stays. So, that's how this story closes. Or maybe it quietly opens a new one too. Hey, my wonderful friends, you're still here, aren't you? If you're hearing my voice now, maybe something about Lena and Jack, about silent courage and second chances, touched a soft place in your heart, just like it did for me. You know, the Stoics remind us, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. This story proves that. Lena spent years bracing for every worst-case scenario alone, only to find out sometimes help doesn't come with fanfare, but with a steady hand beside you when you're too tired to stand. Jack carried his own storms inside him. Yet as Marcus Aurelius wrote, waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one. And he did. Not perfectly, not without scars, but he showed up and stayed. Maybe that's our quiet lesson here tonight. Healing isn't always big words and brave speeches. Sometimes it's a soft door clicking shut behind someone who finally chooses to stay. Sometimes it's the warm laugh of a child who trusts again. And sometimes it's remembering that even when life reroutes you to places you never planned to go, you can still land exactly where you belong. So if you've made it to this point, maybe life has tested you too. Maybe you've held it together for too long. Let this be your sign. It's okay to let someone in. It's okay to be seen. It's okay to rest. If this story moved you even a little, I hope you'll like this video, share it with someone who might need a gentle reminder tonight, and subscribe to this channel so we can keep sharing moments that remind us we're never truly alone. Stay kind, stay brave, and remember, sometimes the hero isn't the one who saves you once. It's the one who stays. Good night, my friends. Until next time.